I've got a question to Mr. Habel. Do you have access to public media? Because what you've been saying, that should be presented to the public at large. People should know all this. I actually speak to the media quite a lot. We've started the map of enforcement orders, Czech TV, also covered this issue on multiple occasions, but it's usually a part of the news, so the coverage is 30 seconds, But the Czech TV and other media have started covering this issue. Of course, we need to talk about this more. We talk a lot about responsibility, financial literacy, etc. But it's not only this. There are root causes that need to be debated. You've outlined an interesting list of people who suffer from this, but obviously there are people who benefit from this situation as well. There are people and institutions who are lobbying to maintain the status quo. How strong are they? The problem is that employers, labor offices, social and welfare authorities, they don't really do much. They haven't done much. On the other hand, there are lobbyists who are lobbying against changes because many large creditors have their own debt collectors they act in concert with, and they don't want to go for territorially competent debt collectors. But if you want to take somebody to court, you also have to go to the territorially competent court. You can't just pick whichever court you wish. Unfortunately, the market with debt is highly competitive. Competitiveness usually leads to higher efficiency, but here competitiveness leads to competitive advantages of those who abuse the system. I mean, debt collectors who avoid law, because if you avoid law or if you don't comply strictly in line with law, your debt collection can be more efficient. So those who act in concert with law are losing business, while those who lobby, bribe politicians, and use unfair channels, they usually have much more business than the fair ones. So why is there this limited support from the parliament? Why there are no parties or MPs interested? There's almost nothing heard from the parliament. And you're right. Politicians tell me that they agree with me, as they support me, but they will never say this out loud. They will never say this in public. Either their political parties don't like this topic, or, how to put it nicely, many of them are under influence of lobbyists. Lobbyists are really strong in the parliament, and MPs rather listen to lobbyists. They don't really want to listen to you, an NGO. What can you do for them? With the territorial competence of debt collectors, It's been supported by some parties, unfortunately, extremists as well, and communists, and also social democrats. Right-wing parties are officially against. Unfortunately, even individually, they would agree with you and say, yes, it would help. But their ideology and official line is that no. And the current leading party, the movement ANO, they are against, because the second man in the movement, Mr. Faltínek's got his friends amongst lobbyists. Their minister, then Minister of Justice, Mr. Pelikan, who did a lot to help improve this situation, unfortunately felt the pressure from his party, and he did his best to avoid the territorial competence. Now the change to be introduced is that the debt collector who initiated the collection will be the debt collector dealing with the debtor. Say you've got 10 enforcement orders. The one who initiated the first order will be in charge of you as a debtor. So those who initiated, usually the biggest companies in the debt collection business, will be getting free of charge business really every day, because as people fall into multiple indebtedness, start somewhere and usually start with the big ones. So the big ones would be getting their newer and newer enforcement orders. 60% to 90% of enforcement orders are started against people who already have one or more orders. Creditors and debt collectors usually enter into agreements which help them raise profits. For example, if you wanted to start collecting debt from somebody, you will have to put certain amount down. If the debt collection falls through, if the debt collector doesn't succeed, you who initiated the debt collection will have to pay for the costs. With big companies, creditors and debt collectors usually act in concert. There are no down payments and there is no covering of costs. You know, if we've got this new system based on territorial competence, this would not exist. Debt collectors and creditors, for example, oftentimes agree that debt collectors, when debt collecting proceedings are stopped by court, collect money, even though it may have been stopped by the court. If they stop, they would have to pay to the creditor. And if they don't stop it, they don't have to pay. So debt collectors should be independent and impartial, but they are engaged in the case, because if they stop it, they actually damage their own interests because they have to pay money. that's very badly arranged in the law. Let me ask you one more question. At the beginning, you were talking about Czech schools, about children who are less talented and more talented from poor families and well-off families. In the 90s, we kept telling our American friends that it's great that we don't have any elitist schooling and we all go to the same schools and sit in one classroom, rich and poor. I know that, for example, in Scandinavia, you cannot invite just 3 schoolmates to your birthday party. You have to invite the whole class. You cannot just pick and choose. And it's a must. You cannot just select somebody over somebody else. Maybe this should be introduced here. Socially weak children then would mix and mingle with children from better off families. You know what? We need to invest primarily into decreasing differences amongst regions, better conditions for debt relief, and other changes which will help less fortunate regions. What also needs to happen is taxes. The government is thinking about, or have promised, better say, to increase wages of teachers. But how do you do it once it's going to cost a lot of money? And also how to make public schools more of higher quality so that parents doesn't feel under such pressure. By all means, there should be equal chances, and definitely we have grammar schools where children start at age 11 or 12, and some other less fortunate children continue studying at elementary schools all the way up to grade 9. We can't just abolish secondary schools, or grammar schools, better say, for the more talented children, and that would not be the right solution. But on the other hand, we need to invest more into mainstream schooling so that people don't feel that their children will be disadvantaged if they stay at mainstream schools. There are many problems out there. Radek raised many of them. I did raise many of them. But what the key problem is inequality amongst the regions, the quality of schools, which is lower at less fortunate regions. That's where it all starts. Dan mentioned grammar schools. At grade 5, some children, the more fortunate from better off families, continue to grammar schools, and those less fortunate stay at mainstream schools. And then those who continue to grammar schools will never meet again in their lives with those who stayed at mainstream schools. So at age 11, the differences start. You know, my own kids, I'm just facing this problem. Am I going to lead them to grammar schools, schools for the more fortunate, or shall I direct them to mainstream schools? We have many preschool facilities for the elitist children. You know, at age, it's not at age 11, it's already at age 9 or at age 4, even Montessori preschool facility as opposed to mainstream preschool facility, bilingual preschool as opposed to Czech preschool. And that's where the differences start. And the groups, they lose contact. You know, the mainstream kids need the grammar school kids and vice versa. If you're looking at comparative tests, PISA, preschool education makes a big difference, actually. Low-income families with no preschool education, their children are doing much worse in PISA. One of the reasons why children don't attend preschool education is that their parents don't have money for school meals and free of charge school meals. It's difficult. If a preschool facility wants free meals for children, it must register with the authorities. There must be a program offered by the authorities in the given county or region. For example, Ústí nad Labem, Northwest, is not a part of this scheme, even though that's the poorest region in this country, and that's where most children who would really benefit from school meals live. On the other hand, regions that are much better off are a part of this scheme. So unfortunately, the central policy and regional policy and authorities do not communicate properly. Yet another problem, housing. Many people, when they're heavily indebted, they lose the roof above their head. Poor families with children, about 2,000 families that have been impacted heavily and really poor, living on absolute minimum. Children from families where there is nowhere to live, of course, perform much worse at school than children from families with stable housing. And the same for children from divorced families, single-parent families. All this is very relevant, and it's all related to debt and debt enforcement. Municipalities should cooperate with the government. Government pays out 13 billion a year for social housing. But municipalities don't feel motivated to build social housing and to support people. If municipalities were to pay social benefits for housing from their own budget, they would definitely start building social housing, or they would adopt alternative measures, but sending money to overpriced private social housing, which is dramatically overpriced in this country. Okay, this is rather depressive, really. I hope that everybody's okay now after having heard this. Okay, gentlemen, I wish you a lot of success in your future work, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again, ladies and gentlemen, at a conference like this sometimes in the future.